Okay, let's dive in. We've got a really, um, let's say, unusual set of sources for you today. Analytically demanding, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. A listener actually asked us to take a deep dive into two figures. Well, figures who seem like they're at total opposite ends of the American spectrum.
Exactly. We're talking Donald Trump, former president, billionaire developer, and Luigi Mangione, the man accused of assassinating a major healthcare CEO.
And the challenge from the listener, the core question really, was to explore why some people out there, analysts and commentators, are seeing these two as, and this is the quote, basically the same man split down the middle.
Which is a provocative idea.
Hugely provocative, and we need to be absolutely crystal clear right up front. We are not drawing any kind of moral or legal equivalence here. Political talk versus an alleged murder, completely different categories. But our job today is to investigate where the rhetoric does surprisingly align, maybe where some policy ideas intersect, and crucially, how both of them somehow manage to tap into and channel this really deep-seated anti-establishment anger that's just, well, boiling over in America right now.
That's the tension, isn't it? That's what we need to grapple with. You have both figures successfully plugging into this massive kind of generalized public frustration, but they do it using almost inverse methods.
Right. Trump, the ultimate insider in many ways, uses his inherited wealth, his fame, his political power to supposedly fight the very system he's a product of.
And then you have Mangione, who allegedly does the complete opposite, rejects that whole wealthy elite class, supposedly choosing violence, outside the political system entirely as a way to demand change.
And that's where the sources get really genuinely shocking. They suggest that both of these figures, Trump, the law and order guy wielding state power, and Mangione, who almost instantly became this kind of celebrated folk hero killer in some circles.
Yeah, that was bizarre.
Incredibly bizarre. They're both treated, paradoxically, by pretty large groups of people as symbols of a necessary rebellion against the same perceived corrupt elite structure.
So that's the dual narrative. Identical source of anger, you could say, but these diametrically opposed ways of expressing it, that's the split mirror we need to dissect.
Exactly. Okay, so if we really want to understand how two people this different could somehow share a political or, I don't know, social soul, we have to start with the common enemy, the thing that unites their supporters.
Which is?
The entrenched, established corporate elite, the system that a lot of people see as fundamentally predatory.
Right. Let's start with Mangione, then. His alleged motive. The sources are pretty specific, shockingly specific, actually.
They are.
His alleged crime seems rooted in this deep, almost philosophical disdain for corporate America, and specifically this intense frustration with the U.S. health insurance system. He apparently called it parasitic.
Parasitic, yeah. So the alleged act itself seems like this very specific physical rejection of the wealthy elite class, which is interesting because Mangione himself, came from a relatively affluent background, Ivy League educated.
That adds another layer, doesn't it?
It does. And we can trace this critique directly back to that 262-word handwritten note he supposedly left. The media immediately jumped on it, called it his manifesto.
Addressed to the feds. Right. Chilling.
Very chilling. And in it, he reportedly said something like, these parasites simply had it coming. That's not just anger at one person. It's an extremely pointed, almost anti-capitalist critique of the whole structure. Profit over care, as he saw it.
Okay, that's a very specific, very radical rejection. Now, let's contrast that with Donald Trump's whole political narrative.
Completely different style, but tapping into something related.
Yeah, his entire rise, his whole brand, was fueled by this generalized but really powerful anti-establishment message.
Yeah.
He's always railing against the swamp in D.C., the globalist elites, the fake news media. He constantly positions himself as the outsider, the guy crashing the gates, fighting this corrupt system from inside the Oval Office, paradoxically.
And here's the crucial connection the sources are drawing. Both men, despite their differences, tap into this powerful undercurrent that researchers sometimes call middle American radical suspicion. Or Mars.
Mars, right. I've heard that term.
It's the suspicion that isn't just aimed left or right. It's aimed at both rich people, Wall Street types, and predatory corporations. It's this feeling of being squeezed from above and below.
Driven by economics, culture, feeling left behind.
Exactly. And that feeling, that suspicion, it really transcends the usual party lines.
Okay, I see the overlap now. If you believe that the established political class and the giant corporations are basically screwing you over, that suspicion naturally leads to support for populist ideas, right?
Absolutely. Things like cracking down on monopolies or maybe protectionist trade stuff. Ideas that could actually appeal to people on the anti-corporate left and the anti-globalist right.
That's a rare sweet spot in politics today. Finding common ground between those two groups, that defines the energy behind both Mangione's surprising support and Trump's base.
And nothing, absolutely nothing, brings that shared cross-partisan frustration into sharper focus than healthcare. That seems to be the ultimate unifying force here.
Okay, tell us more about that. How did Mangione's alleged actions, focused on a healthcare CEO, manage to achieve what one source called this rare feat of uniting Democrats and the Mangione crowd?
Because the frustration, the pain is practically universal. That analysis really nailed it. Mangione's core critique of the health insurance industry somehow resonated with both Democrats and the pro-Trump MAGA folks. They might disagree on solutions, but they share this deep criticism of the system's perceived cruelty, its inefficiency, its coldness.
And it's not just abstract anger. We actually have some polling data, don't we?
We do. Now, overall, public support for Mangione himself was definitely unfavorable. Something like 43% unfavorable versus 23% favorable. So most people condemned the alleged act.
But that 23% favorable is still significant. What drove that?
Well, the analysis suggests that for that substantial minority, the feeling was rooted squarely in their own frustrations with the healthcare system. It was this potent, almost desperate desire for systemic change. It's like, for nearly a quarter of respondents, the motive he claimed resonated more strongly than the horrific nature of the alleged crime itself.
Wow, that speaks volumes about the level of anger.
It really does, and it's because, as one person put it in a focus group or survey somewhere, pretty much everybody knows somebody that got messed over by the healthcare system. It's personal.
Yeah.
When the system deals with you when you're at your most vulnerable state, as the source puts it, and you feel like you're being deliberately taken advantage of, well, the emotional reaction is just incredibly powerful. It stops being about policy specifics and becomes this deep moral issue. It makes the whole establishment feel vulnerable.
It absolutely makes the system vulnerable. But the sources push it even further. They float this really striking, maybe even shocking, idea that Mangione's blend of intense, cross-cutting political passions, this mix of left and right rage, somehow makes him analogous to the median American voter.
That's a powerful hypothesis, isn't it?
It really is. What does that even mean?
Well, it suggests that maybe the perceived political center in America isn't actually moderate and passive, just wanting compromise. Maybe the real center is radicalized,
Oh.
furious, but doesn't have a single political party that speaks to all its frustrations.
So if the median voter is defined by this maximum level nonpartisan anger,
Then Mangione's alleged manifesto, which targets the system that seems to hurt everyone regardless of politics, becomes a really disturbing symbol of that central radicalized rage.
okay, so we've established this common wellspring of anger. Anti-establishment, anti-corporate, especially focused on healthcare. But now we get to the split mirror part, the core of this deep dive. How do they channel that anger? What's the ideological vehicle? Let's start with Mangione's really strange political mix. The sources call it the extreme middle.
Yeah, this is probably the hardest part to pin down because Mangione's reported views seem like a deliberate mix and match job. It intentionally defies the usual left-right labels.
How so?
Well, on one hand, you have traditionally left-leaning stuff, apparently a strong concern for the environment, climate change, sharp criticism of the healthcare system, obviously, and even an expressed interest in progressive figures like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay, that sounds fairly standard progressive concern.
But then you pair that seamlessly with views typically found on the right,
Such as
clear opposition to wokeism. A documented dislike, apparently, of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, DEI, and even positive comments about conservative media figures like Tucker Carlson.
wow, okay, so that's not just being moderate or undecided. That's actively pulling from both sides.
Exactly. It's not about finding a middle ground. It's more like a radical rejection of the entire existing two-party framework.
Which really defines this idea of the extreme middle. It suggests someone whose political passions are so intense, so deeply felt, that they just override any loyalty to a standard party platform. They'll find common cause with anyone who's attacking the perceived corrupt status quo, no matter where they come from ideologically.
Right. And the key difference here, the tragic difference perhaps, is that for Mangione, this radical energy was allegedly channeled into violence, into non-electoral means to try and force systemic change.
That's the dark potential the sources highlight, isn't it? When voters feel like their complex grievances, the ones that don't fit neatly into a left or right box, are completely ignored by the existing political system.
The energy doesn't just disappear. It can radicalize. It can find extreme outlets, often negative ones. And Mangione, in this view, becomes this ultimate symbol of the dangerous potential of a deeply frustrated, politically homeless, radicalized center.
And we really have to stress the element of choice here, given his background. This wasn't someone pushed to the margins with no other option.
No, absolutely not. Ivy League education, background as a data engineer. He had the intellectual tools, the potential resources to pursue change through established channels.
Like what? Class action lawsuits against insurance companies, maybe starting some kind of tech alternative.
Exactly. Those paths were theoretically open to him, yet the sources suggest he chose what they term unconventional action.
And that choice, coming from someone with privilege, arguably elevates the alleged act. It's not just desperation. It reads like a calculated philosophical rejection of the entire elite system he could have participated in.
He allegedly rejected the very tools, litigation, innovation within the system that his background afforded him, opting instead for this symbolic, violent confrontation.
Okay, now let's turn that split mirror. Let's look at the other side. Donald Trump and the Mangione system.
Right. Now, the Mangione movement isn't really a mixed bag of ideologies like Mangione's reported views. It's much more coherent, even if it's fluid. It's fundamentally a populist, nationalist, and deeply anti-establishment social movement.
A social movement first, then maybe policies second.
That's what the sources suggest. The core psychological drive seems to be about reclaiming something perceived as lost honor, declining esteem, institutional disrespect. It's for people who feel marginalized by globalization, by cultural changes, by elites who they think look down on them.
So the main currency for Mangione is really status, recognition, respect. It's not just about tax rates or regulations.
Exactly. Policy matters, of course, economic protectionism, less immigration, fighting woke culture, but these are all framed within this larger battle against globalism and political correctness. The movement demands symbolic signals from institutions, government, media, universities, that their values, their way of life, should be esteemed, not scorned. They see the current elite not just as political opponents, but as an enemy.
Okay, so if we compare their critiques of corporations through these two different lenses, Mangione's extreme middle versus Trump's Mangia la Mary, the split becomes crystal clear.
Absolutely. For Trump, the critique of corporations is almost entirely transactional. It's about bad deals that hurt America. It's about companies being cheaters that need to be regulated, but regulated to serve the nation. It's about bringing manufacturing jobs home. It's about national economic victory, winning. Whereas Mangione's critique, at least based on that alleged manifesto, seems much more philosophical, deeply anti-capitalist even. For him, it wasn't just about bad deals, it was the system itself, this idea of profit over care in industrial society that was the fundamental problem, the disease.
So Trump wants to tame the beast, make it work for us. Mangione allegedly wanted to slay the beast entirely.
That's a good way to put it. Which brings us inevitably to the moment the mirror has to break. The point where Trump's administration had to directly condemn Mangione despite any shared anti-elite sentiment.
Right. The populist movement hits a hard legal and ethical wall.
Exactly. Despite the overlap in targeting elites, Trump publicly denounced the support Mangione was getting. He called the admiration a sickness, actually, described the alleged killing as cold-blooded.
Because he had to. The law and order president can't endorse political violence, even if the target represents the corporate elite he often rails against. He has to protect the state, the judicial process.
And it wasn't just words. This condemnation was backed up immediately by the full force of the state. The Trump administration went hard, aggressively pursuing the death penalty for Mangione. They instantly framed the crime as political violence, which fit perfectly with their tough-on-crime, punitive, law and order agenda.
The political reaction was incredibly fast and aggressive.
Stunningly so. You had high-level administration officials. The White House press secretary, Stephen Miller, was mentioned immediately slapping labels on Mangione. Left-wing assassin, communist revolutionary.
Even though his actual ideology seemed much more mixed.
Precisely. His lawyers pushed back hard, arguing those labels were false and prejudicial, pointing out his mixed views and lack of any real ties to communist or explicitly far-left groups. But the administration wanted that simple narrative. He's one of them, the radical left enemies.
And this aggressive political talk actually started to cause problems for the legal case itself, didn't it? Created a kind of institutional clash.
It really did. It got so bad that a federal judge had to step in and issue a pretty stern warning to the Department of Justice.
What did the judge say?
Essentially, that if administration officials kept making public statements that could prejudice Mangione's right to a fair trial, there could be serious consequences for the prosecution itself. The judge warned the whole capital case was being put at serious risk.
Wow. So the political establishment, represented by Trump's DOJ, was willing to potentially endanger a capital murder trial just to control the political story, just to firmly brand this anti-corporate figure as an enemy of the state.
That's what the situation suggests. It's a really stark, frankly shocking example of how the intense political polarization embodied by both figures in different ways could directly threaten the integrity of the justice system itself.
So beyond the ideologies, the way these two figures build their public image, the way they communicate, really shows this split mirror dynamic in action. They both manage to dominate the conversation, but using totally different tools and self-presentations.
Absolutely. Trump's whole political persona is built on embracing his elite status, amplifying it even. His brand is his inherited wealth. His reality TV stardom, this image of being the ultimate winner who beat the system at its own game.
It's the unapologetic, almost robber baron kind of status. The guy who uses power and money to get things done and isn't sorry about it.
Exactly, which is the absolute polar opposite of Mangione's alleged violent rejection of that exact same wealthy class.
And Trump's persona completely dictates his communication style. The sources describe it as just incessant, high volume, direct, totally unfiltered.
Yeah, he doesn't really do traditional political negotiation or careful messaging. His strategy is all about rapid confrontational response. He constantly frames himself as the victim under attack while launching these relentless assaults on opponents, the media, the courts, anyone who crosses him.
It relies on sheer volume and repetition, doesn't it?
Totally. The sources point to this consistent pattern. Make a claim, often easily disproven or false, like the economy being the best ever, or rigged election claims, and just repeat it over and over and over again, dozens, hundreds of times, until it just sinks in and becomes accepted truth for his followers. The goal seems to be to just overwhelm the information landscape.
You see it in his personal attacks, too. Like, think about his relationship with Michael Cohen, his former lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
When Cohen was working for him, Trump called him loyal, wonderful, a great guy. The instant Cohen started cooperating with investigators, Trump flips 180 degrees. Suddenly, Cohen's a rat. Not very smart. Didn't do much work for him anyway.
The weapon is the speed and the sheer overwhelming force of the attack. It leaves no room for nuance or defense.
Okay, now contrast that with Mangione. His communication style, if you can call it that, is almost the opposite.
It's silence, mostly, and dramatic symbolism. His public voice is defined by this deep quiet, punctuated only by that one single formal handwritten note, the manifesto, trying to explain his alleged thinking. He's the quiet extremist, letting the alleged act speak for itself.
But the sources show that the vacuum created by that silence was filled almost immediately, filled by this incredibly powerful viral image.
That's right. Mangione became this polarizing figure almost overnight, and really notably a folk hero to some. A lot of that initial attention was driven purely by his physical appearance.
The perp walk images went everywhere.
They did, and social media just exploded with these really bizarre comparisons, people calling him prettier Jesus or a 21st century martyr, just based on a photograph. It was a strange cultural moment.
And that image seemed to generate real widespread emotional support, didn't it? Crossing political lines.
It did, surprisingly quickly. You saw it manifest in the real world. Graffiti dedicated to him. Street art. There was apparently a piece in France calling him Luigi Mangione, hero of the people.
Wow, in France.
Yeah. And then that online Give Send Go fund that popped up and raised over $1 million extremely fast. It became this palpable cultural thing. There were even reports of inmates shouting, "Free Luigi" from a Pennsylvania prison during a news broadcast.
That level of visceral sympathy for someone accused of murder, it points to something deeply unsettled in society, doesn't it?
It really does. And it feeds directly into this martyr complex that you actually see in both narratives, Trump's and Mangione's, though the way it plays out is very different and highly contested.
How so?
Well, Trump constantly, relentlessly tries to portray himself as a martyr for truth and freedom, fighting against the radical left Democrats and the globalist elites. His narrative is always that his legal troubles aren't his fault, they're political persecution because he stands up for his supporters, for their values.
Of course, his critics see it very differently. They argue his legal issues are just the natural consequences of his own actions, not some principled stand.
Exactly. It's a contested narrative. Now, Mangione's martyr narrative is even more complicated and frankly disturbing. His supporters, the ones calling him a hero, literally cast him as a hero and a martyr.
A martyr for what cause?
For the universal cause of opposing corporate greed, fighting the broken healthcare system. They see him as this surrogate for rebellion, someone who actually did the extreme thing that maybe they fantasize about but wouldn't or couldn't do themselves.
That's a dangerous idea.
It poses a fundamental challenge to democratic norms. I mean, the traditional idea of a martyr involves suffering, usually non-violently, for your beliefs. The sources explicitly point out Mangione is accused of murder. Celebrating him as a martyr becomes this ends justify the means sentiment that's fundamentally inconsistent with stable democracy.
It basically elevates the alleged crime because the target, the symbol of corporate power, is so widely disliked.
Precisely. The ends seem to justify the means in the eyes of his admirers.
It seems like both of these figures, Trump and Mangione, operate and really thrive by constantly attacking a common enemy, the mainstream media. That conflict seems central to their appeal.
Oh, absolutely central. For Trump, battling the media isn't just a tactic. It's a core part of his brand identity. It's a strategic populist weapon. He habitually attacks news outlets as fake news, calls journalists the enemy of the American people.
And the goal there seems pretty clear.
Yeah, this constant barrage, often using claims that are demonstrably false or wildly exaggerated, serves one crucial purpose: reinforce the narrative that established institutions can't be trusted. Only he tells the truth. Everyone else is lying.
And the data backs this up, unfortunately. We see trust in national media just plummeting, right? Especially among Republicans, but increasingly among independents, too.
Definitely. While Democrats still have somewhat more confidence, huge segments of the population now view the mainstream media with deep suspicion, seeing it as biased or fundamentally antagonistic, and that plays directly into Trump's hands. He thrives on that distrust.
Now, Mangione's alleged actions also generated massive media attention, obviously. But the response was also highly polarized, mirroring that same distrust.
It did. The mainstream media coverage itself came under fire from different directions. Some outlets were accused of maybe sensationalizing the story, focusing too much on the grisly details. Others were criticized for offering what some saw as an overly empathetic narrative.
Oh, so empathetic.
By focusing maybe too heavily on his Ivy League background, his supposed philosophical motives, rather than keeping the focus squarely on the victim and the horrific nature of the alleged crime itself. It became part of the polarization.
So the unspoken similarity here is really powerful.
Yeah.
You have these two figures, one rich and powerful, one an alleged violent outsider, both seen as such disruptive forces that they provoke this intense, emotional, polarized reaction from the established political and media systems.
Exactly. They both prove that if you challenge the elite status quo in a profound way, whether it's through nonstop inflammatory rhetoric from the top or allegedly through extreme violence from the outside, you guarantee attention and you inevitably heighten the divisions in society.
And this battle over the narrative, as we touched on earlier, spilled right into the courtroom. It directly implicated the Department of Justice under Trump.
It absolutely did. You had Trump administration officials like the Attorney General at the time, Pamela Bondi, making these very public statements before any trial, directing prosecutors to seek the death penalty, explicitly characterizing the crime as a cold-blooded assassination. They were clearly using the prosecution itself to push the administration's political agenda, their law and order message.
And Mangione's defense team seized on that, didn't they? Used that politicization against the prosecution.
They hit back hard. They argued in court filings and public statements that the whole push for the death penalty was basically a publicity stunt. They accused the highest levels of the Justice Department of fostering a new culture, one that values personal will over process, publicity over discretion, and partisan politics over justice. Strong words.
Incredibly strong. So this legal fight becomes the perfect encapsulation of the whole dynamic, the huge stakes involved.
It really does. You have the intense political polarization represented on one side by the powerful, arguably pro-corporate establishment Trump's administration, and on the other by the alleged anti-corporate radical Mangione. And this clash directly impacts the core function of the judicial process.
It puts the right to a fair trial itself at risk.
Precisely. The case highlights the severe danger when intensely political rhetoric, especially driven by the executive branch, contaminates the legal arena. The state, under Trump, was demonstrably trying to define Mangione politically as a symbol of left-wing chaos, regardless of the actual, more complex reality of his views, potentially jeopardizing the fairness of the trial in the process. #outro.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of source material here, a lot of complex ideas. After this deep dive, what does it all really boil down to? What does this split down the middle actually mean for us, for you listening?
Well, I think the core difference, the split, is about how that shared populist rage gets channeled. On one side, you have Trump, the wealthy insider, who uses established, though incredibly confrontational political means. He embraces that winner status to fight for his base within the system, more or less.
And on the other side?
You have Mangione, who represents the alleged channeling of that same rage into something completely different, radical, violent, non-electoral action, a total physical rejection of the system itself.
So fundamentally, both figures are thriving on the same fuel source. This widespread, pervasive feeling that our institutions are broken, elites are corrupt, the whole system is rigged against the average person.
That seems undeniable from the sources. Trump taps into that by giving people a political identity, a tribe, a sense of shared honor in their fight against the elites, all orchestrated from the very top of the power structure.
While Mangione offers something much darker.
Much darker. He offers this raw, maybe terrifying surrogate for rebellion. He becomes a symbol of the most dangerous possible outcome when that deep, nonpartisan frustration finds no healthy outlet and instead gets channeled into extreme violent action.
They're like two different, equally intense symptoms of the same underlying disease, this chronic condition of systemic distrust and perceived elite failure.
I think that's right. And the sources suggest that this extreme middle movement, the thing Mangione seems to embody, isn't really a coherent ideology or a future political party waiting to happen.
What is it then?
It's more like a convergence of deep-seated frustrations from both sides, a toxic concentration point for all the grievances felt by people who feel betrayed by the traditional left and the traditional right. They see neither established party as capable of tackling the core problems, especially this perceived corporate predation.
Okay, so if that incredibly intense, nonpartisan rage really does exist at the heart of the American electorate, simmering away, that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought, doesn't it?
It definitely does.
Which figure ultimately sets the tone for the future? Is it the charismatic, rule-bending, wealthy winner like Trump who tries to co-opt the system for his base? Or is it the alleged anti-corporate martyr like Mangione who violently rejects the system entirely? How will America decide to deal with its systemic frustrations moving forward?
Do we choose the ballot box, however flawed, or does that radicalized center feeling unheard ultimately choose the bomb, metaphorically or otherwise? That seems to be the stark choice, the disturbing question that the sources leave us to wrestle with.